One of the most disappointing teams in 2022 was the Detroit Tigers. However, there's optimism this year. A lot of young talent on the squad. We're going to break it down here on the Route Report edition of the OK Baseball Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Route Report here at the OK Baseball Podcast. We are back with another team preview. The third year we're doing this. This is a fantastic thing, and I am lucky to have, for the third year in a row, one of the OGs of the season team previews here is Rogelio, Castillo, and Chris Brown from Woodward Tigers. How you doing, everyone? Welcome into the show. I am so happy you guys are back. Chris, Rogelio, welcome in.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's good to be back, man.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we talked. I hate that it's always like a year since we talk again. We really got to fix that this year. Maybe get some post checks with the Tigers. But that's what we're going to talk about this year, or this episode, I should say. We're going to talk about the Detroit Tigers. And let's get right into it. And Chris, I'm going to start over with you. Last season, 66 and 96 was 2022's record. I listened to last year's episode before we started off. It's safe to say that all three of us had a lot more optimism for the Detroit Tigers last year than 66 and 96. What went wrong? Take me through 2022 and just your thought process.
So, yeah, literally everything went wrong. I didn't go back and listen, but I would be curious to go back and listen because the Tigers were coming off an unexpectedly strong season in 2021. I think they won 77 games, maybe 74. I don't remember exactly, but they did a lot better than everybody expected. And then they went and added Eduardo Rodriguez and Javier Baez. And I don't know if we did our show before or after they traded for Austin Meadows.
It was before.
Yeah. So, and they signed Andrew Chafin. And yeah, they were looking like a team that was finally poised to compete after a 4 or 5 year rebuild. And then just the wheels fell off immediately. You could say the first domino, which sounds funny, is when Riley Green broke his foot in spring training. Riley Green was their prized rookie. They had two prized rookies, but Riley Green was the one we prized more. And he broke his foot after he got hit by a foul tip, and then hit a triple off Garrett Cole, and then they discovered he had a broken foot, like the same at bat. So it was like, oh man, because he had been performing. And then, Eduardo Rodriguez had a personal issue where he disappeared from the team for a couple months. Austin Meadows hit 0 home runs. He dealt with injuries, and then he also had kind of mental issues, depression. And the veteran hitters all sucked. Jeimer Candelario was bad. Robbie Grossman was bad. Jonathan Scope was bad. Javi Baez hurt his thumb and was terrible through May. It was just about everything that could go wrong went wrong. I didn't even mention Casey Mize blew out his elbow. Tarek Skubal got hurt. Matt Manning got hurt. They went through 16 starting pitchers, Raj. Was it 18, 16?
Well, it was I think closer to 18.
So yeah, just literally like just about anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, and it culminated in them firing their general manager Al Avila after 6.5 years of running the Tigers. So we're kind of starting over again.
Yeah, Raj, he mentions a lot of good things here. Well, a lot of bad things, but really summed it up well. Talking about the veterans that really struggled, but also there was a certain prospect in Spencer Torkelson who really struggled as well. Now, if you went back to last year's episode, that's the last time I'll say this, but both of you were more hyped about Riley Green than Spencer Torkelson, so win there. Congratulations. If you want that, congratulations. However, is there anything good to take from 2022? Is there anything that you can put in your pocket to move forward and be optimistic about 2023?
Well, there's a couple things to take away from last year that served the Tigers well, and that was the performance of the bullpen. Because you're talking about a bullpen that lost Joe Jimenez in the trade. They traded him, they traded Gregory Soto, and they still have a pretty good bullpen. Will Vest stepped up last year. Alex Lang became a really big thing. And you saw even the likes of Bo Brisky, Garrett Hill, development-wise. These are guys who have been drafted in the 26th and 27th rounds, respectively. and they were able to come up and contribute. Now, a lot of Tiger fans were like, "Well, that's not a lot." But this is a team that doesn't get those kind of contributions ever. This is the last since the Tigers since the '90s. We haven't seen this kind of draft capital helping out, and so I think that was a positive thing to take away. Joey Wentz emerged as a starter, who they picked up from the Shane Green trade, and he was turning out pretty well. Alex Faedo came out, also pitched not too badly. So to me, the pitching was tolerable, and it kept the Tigers. I don't even respectable. I mean, in terms of like just it was a bad watch all around offensively, but pitching wise, we saw really some glimpses of Chris Fetter and the staff working together and maximizing every single pitcher they had.
You just returned from spring training. We just talked off air how you were coming back from Tampa, your first time down in spring training. A big year for the Tigers. I mean, I think that's safe to say that after last year and after getting some contract extensions and contract signings more than 2 years. I mean, we were making that joke a few episodes back how the Robbie Grossman trade was like the longest contract they had in a couple seasons. Well, Baez and Rodriguez obviously changed that. Both of them had down years. Coming into this season, you add a couple more pitchers. How was spring training for you, by the way? How was that experience? And then maybe give me an idea of what kind of position battles are really starting to take shape down there.
Well, the whole experience was surreal because this was the first time I've ever been to spring training, and as a reporter, so it was a little bit overwhelming at first, but then you get kind of the swing of things, and so, but it was cool. It was very cool and very also revealing to see kind of this is the first time I had clubhouse access to, and kind of seeing things behind the scenes, if you will, and how things are going, and that kind of leads into position battles right now. We've seen so far Jonathan Scope have a couple starts to third base, and you're going to see him go across the infield, and between him and Nick Maton, who's going to play third, I think that's going to be a really good battle. To the outfield, it's Kerry Carpenter and Akil Baddoo, both left-handed bats who are fighting for that fourth spot, and both bring a different skill set. So Baddoo's a speed guy. He can cause trouble getting the ground balls, beating them out, and speed plays well. Kerry Carpenter, he's got a lot of power. He's improving defensively. Saw him in left today. So that fourth outfield spot is going to be very interesting. And even in the bullpen, I mean, there is a couple spots available, and Tigers have a surplus of minor league free agents who they invited to camp that are out there. You have Castro, who they picked up from San Francisco. They have Chase Shreve. I can never say his name right. The
Chase Shreve.
Thank you. Who is also fighting for a spot there on the bullpen. So bullpen, infield too. I mean, Andy Baez, who is going to play for Team Cuba, left today. Same thing with Scope. So also with Baez and Cabrera. So all these players are you're going to see a chance to see the guys like Ryan Kreidler, Andre Lipsius, who I'm a big fan of, get more playing time and see what they're capable of. And so I think that's going to be a good opportunity to see alternatives for even bench spots.
Well, on the starting pitcher side, there were a couple additions this offseason, Chris. You get Matt Boyd coming over from Seattle, Michael Lorenzen coming from the Angels. You had Rodriguez come in last year. You mentioned the Mize injury last season as well. So this rotation is going to look a lot different than last year, at least hopefully for a full season. You optimistic about what this rotation can look like? What's your thoughts, especially about the two new additions of Boyd and Lorenzen?
Yeah, I am fairly optimistic, and part of it has to do with some of the depth that they were able to build last year. They are getting Spencer Turnbull back from he missed all of last year. He threw a no-hitter in 2021 in Seattle, and then blew his arm out like 3 weeks later. So they're getting him back. He was really trending up before that injury, so that's going to help a little bit. We don't really know how many innings he's going to be able to throw this year, and you never know when guys are coming back from Tommy John, but the early returns are pretty promising. So the top three will be Eduardo Rodriguez, Spencer Turnbull, and Matt Manning is returning. He's another young starter who showed some promise last year. Matthew Boyd, Tigers fans are very familiar with him. He's a guy who had a lot of ups and downs, struggled with some home runs, at times looked like a dominant pitcher. He was striking out guys at a really high rate. I want to say, was it 2019? And but he's a guy that he really digs into all the metrics and things like that. He'll go out to drive line. I'm not worried about him getting the best out of himself. So that's probably a number 4 starter, but that's valuable for this team. And Lorenzen's an interesting guy because he was a reliever forever. He started in the minors, started a little bit last year for the Angels and looked okay. And I think there is some upside there, but again, it's one of those things where you worry a little bit about how many innings he can actually throw. But as I was talking about the depth, and Raj touched on it he mentioned Bo Brisky and Garrett Hill. Those are guys that had to come up and pitch last year. They have Joey Wentz, who came up and made some starts last year. He is probably good enough to be in the rotation, but he might not get a job just because of the other 5 guys. You got Alex Fido, he mentioned. You've got Wilmer Flores, who's a prospect who took a really big leap last year. They've got Reese Olson, who's another prospect. He's fighting through some tenderness in his elbow right now, but he's ramping up, and he's on the 40-man roster. So I think that the starting rotation is going to be fine, even if they deal with another series of injuries. Maybe they can't withstand 10 injuries like they had last year. But I think the starting pitching, we did a poll on our show the other day, or just kind of an impromptu Q&A session, and I think everybody agreed that the starting rotation is probably going to be the strength of this team this year.
That's a great feeling. That's a really good feeling to know that your rotation can be the strength, especially what happened last season with injuries and teams or in players being on a leave of absence. Fantastic. Raj, I got to know, AJ Hinch, obviously the manager of this team now, with all the injuries that occurred last year. I know that I don't want to call the word excuse, but I mean, let's call it what it is. There's a lot of things that went wrong for the Tigers last season. Is there anything that's boiling around the Detroit media that Hinch could possibly be on the hot seat?
I don't think so. I think that if anything, he feels a little more confident in the fact that with Scott Harris being there now and having people that are more like-minded, I think he feels comfortable because there ain't no bones about it. I mean, he's not going to miss Al Avila. I mean, it was a very strange behind-the-scenes kind of thing. It was my first year being there in the dugout, and you kind of start paying attention to things, and there was no type of communication. It was just like it was a very odd vibe. And then during spring training, you see Scott Harris come up to Hinch, pat him on the back, and they're laughing like, and it's not like show. It's not like something like fake and all that. It's not. It seemed very genuine, and so I think that's one of the things that immediately Hinch has the ability to go and realize that, okay, these are the things he asked for. They asked for depth. They got it with Furley, Maton, and Malloy. And so I think because he's getting what he needs, I think the whole hot seat thing is something not to think about right now.
Yeah, if I might interject here, I mean, I do think anybody who's not that familiar with the Tigers probably wants to know about this whole Scott Harris thing. Basically, Al Avila was an old school scout style GM. And they brought in Scott Harris, who's kind of a wonderkind. I think he's 35, 36 years old. And he immediately, it wasn't like a sea change, but he immediately started putting his imprint on the roster. And one of the things that the Tigers had forever was they just seemed to love these guys who swung at everything and didn't walk. For whatever reason, I beats me why that was their thing. But they had Victor Reyes, they had Willie Castro, they had Harold Castro, they had Candelario would walk a little bit, but all those guys are gone now, and they replaced them. So they traded Gregory Soto, their closer, to Philadelphia. Got Nick Maton, Matt Vierling, and Donnie Sands. They also traded Cody Clemens. So they got 2 really versatile players in Maton and Vierling, and an interesting kind of backup catcher profile in Sands. But all those guys walk a fair amount, and they don't strike out a ton, which is something that was music to our ears. And then the same thing when they traded Joe Jimenez to Atlanta. They got Justin Henry Malloy, who was a third baseman / left fielder, maybe first baseman down the road, who ran like an 18% walk rate in the minors last year. He is a super patient hitter, got a little power too. So just immediately you could see Harris, and he talked about it in his opening press conference. He wanted to dominate the strike zone on both sides of the ball. And so that's there were small moves, but they were, noticeable nonetheless. They're trying to change the direction of the franchise.
That's a good feeling. I like to hear that. Well, you talk about changing the franchise. They also changed the dimensions of Comerica Park. That's something that's new this season as well. Obviously, one of the hardest parks to play defense in, especially in the outfield. You add some guys in, like you mentioned in the Philadelphia trade. Any of those guys you think are going to help with athleticism out there? I know Riley Green's going to be a good piece. Chris, I'll swing it over to you real quick. What's your thoughts about the additions, or actually, I should say the subtractions of Comerica Park? You think it's going to change anything defensively, or with the Tigers lineup in the bats?
No, yeah, I mean, I don't think the dimension changes are going to do a ton. It's still going to be, I think, the second deepest center field in baseball. But Veerling is a very athletic, speedy guy. He can help in the outfield. Maton has a lot of defensive versatility. He'll help in the infield. So, excuse me. Raj can take over. I'm losing my voice here.
No, okay. But with Matt Veerling, I think one of the things about Matt Veerling's athleticism, and this is something that Hinch mentioned a few days ago, was you're going to see him play. He started center field today, and he's going to be playing quite a bit over there. You haven't seen him play the infield too much. And so I think that's going to give him the opportunity to put Green in the corner spot so he can kind of conserve himself a little bit too, because he takes a lot of risk when he's out in the outfield, taking and diving, what have you. So I think Veerling is definitely an upgrade to have out there for a guy. I mean, no offense to Victor Reyes, but he was kind of stiff out there. And Reyes wasn't a bad fielder, for the record. Everybody always ragged on him, but he wasn't bad. But I digress. And then with Nick Maton, you can have him play second, you can have him play third. So the position versatility right there, and even with Malloy, it was something that Hinch mentioned. 19 of the 31 players in the camp are going to play different positions. And so even with Cesar, you're going to see some time, for example, Cesar Hernandez, who I think has a good chance of making the ball club out of spring training. And Andy Baez, too. Baez can play first, you can play third, and same thing with Scope. So those two, with Veerling, Maton, even with Donnie Sands, I think that the Tigers have positioned themselves to add a little more depth, especially catcher-wise, when you're not sure you're going to get with Dingler, who is down in Double-A, who's the next catching prospect to come up. Josh Croucher will be spending his first official season in Double-A, so I don't know. I think that one of the things that he was able to do really quickly, Sky Harris, was address the lack of depth, and it was clear as day, because you can talk about Colt Keith all you want, but the Tigers still didn't have any outfield prospects that would come. They're even coming close to come up.
If these Tigers have the amount of grit compared to what you guys, especially Chris, you're doing right now, you're having this podcast with me while you're sick, these guys are going to be a playoff contention team. Chris, I'm going to give you one more inning off here. Roger, go back to you. Spencer Torkelson. I mean, we kind of talked about it earlier, but Spencer Torkelson, we put out a video on the YouTube channel just a few weeks ago, and we asked the question, do you think he can bounce back? A lot of comments came in saying it's not happening. He's a bust. There's no way. Now, obviously, I personally think that's way too soon to make that decision. It's one season. However, you two are the ones that pay attention to this team way more than I do. What is your thought process on Spencer Torkelson? Do you think that he can bounce back? Do you think he's a bust? Now, this is a first pick in the draft. Is this the old GM way, like we were mentioning, that where he just swings at everything? Or is this a guy that can be corrected and can get in the right direction?
You know, the thing is that he's already off to an 0-8 start. He hasn't had a hit yet. He had a long fly ball that would have been out at Comerica, would have been a home run at Comerica Park, but it was long out at down in Lakeland. So I'm not gonna say he's a bust yet, because I still want the jury's still out on that. But as far as going out there raking the ball and destroying and doing those things a little bit, I think he's pressing too much. I still think he's trying to feel his way out on the at bats. Even during some of the during batting practice, some of the stuff like that, I didn't see a lot of like loud contact. Like Riley Green, loud contact. Even Akil Badu, loud contact. With Torkelson, I still haven't seen it. I didn't see anything that stood out to me that was talked about the swing changes. I yet to fail to see the change that. And so what I find funny is people are being more patient about him, more so than I see some of the people commenting about Akil Badu. Well, he's just going to be a fourth outfielder. Well, Spencer Torkelson, for his where he's drafted in the draft, should be at least 1.5, maybe close to a 2-war player. Give you 10, 20 home runs. That didn't happen. And so if you're going to have that kind of versatility, if you're going to have that kind of spotlight on you, you should expect some sort of results. And to me, if in the first 3 months, if he gets off to the start he did last year, you put the Tigers again kind of in a bad light because they didn't sign an alternative. I mean, Miguel's not in his final year is not going to get a lot of time at first base. And is Scope going to play for the time at first place? Who knows? I mean, Malloy, you could see there, as Chris mentioned earlier, as a possibility if he starts to bat well. But right now, Christian, I honestly, I don't see it happening right now. I just don't. I mean, stranger things have happened all of a sudden out of nowhere. The regular season begins and boom. But I think right now he's still pressing too much.
Chris, hop back in the batting cage here. What actually has to happen for Spencer to be successful this year?
Well, I mean, the confounding thing with Torkelson is that, his brutal season didn't look like the sort of terrible season you sometimes see from young big leaguers where they strike out too much and they don't walk. And he walked at an above average rate. His strikeout rate was completely under control. He just couldn't hit. He would repeatedly miss middle pitches that he should be destroying, just missed them, or mishit them, or rolled over to shortstop, or hit a fly ball to the warning track. And that's what we've seen in spring so far. And the most discouraging thing to me is we've talked about this on our show, is that what you want to see from hitters is the ability to adjust to what other teams are doing to them. And Torkelson, they sent him down to Toledo right around the All-Star break, and he spent some time down there. It didn't seem to make any adjustments, and he came back up, and there were no obvious adjustments. And this spring, there was a lot of talk about him getting back to his old swing. That's what he was saying. His swing last year looked exactly like his swing in Arizona State and in the minor leagues, and his swing this year looks exactly like his swing from last year. So I'm not a swing doctor. I'm not a swing specialist. Maybe he's made some small tweaks, but he doesn't look like he's made any adjustments. And so it's hard for me to expect him to go out and improve when he looks exactly like he did last year. I don't want to give up on him. I mean, I see that Jared Kelenic has 3 home runs already for Seattle. He's a very similar kind of situation where this is a guy who was a really highly touted prospect and just came up and didn't hit. And so I, just hold out hope. Maybe he'll figure things out. Maybe it's just going to take a little bit longer. But yeah, I mean, it's getting late early for him. It feels like Tyler Nevin hit a big home run in the game today, and I'm like, well, I mean, if he outperforms Torkelson in spring training, he's on the 40-man roster. Torkelson has some options. He can go to Toledo. I don't think they would do that, but maybe that's the sort of wake-up call he needs.
And
it's a good way.
Well, I was just going to say, the one thing I wanted to mention too. Hinch said this last year when we went down to Toledo about taking adjustments. He was kind of coy about it. It was like, it's not really taking kindly to instruction. So it was kind of thinly veiled. Like, in other words, he's not listening.
Well, we saw that with when was it Nolan Jones for the Indians or the Guardians who were just traded as well, saying he didn't pick up as well. Interesting, highly touted draft pick to move over there. I like how you said it. It's getting late early for this guy. That's a really good way to think about Spencer Torkelson. I have the RotoWare Torque Bomb shirt. That shirt's got to get back. I couldn't even wear it to this podcast today.
I forgot about that shirt.
I still have it. It's hanging up.
We've just been trying to caution people to hey, whatever your expectations were, just kind of lower them. Like if we can get Torkelson to be an average regular, that would be a big win now, because this is not a guy who people were like, yeah, 40 home runs. It's like, no, I don't know. I don't know. I don't see that happening without a major change. But if you could go up and put a 100 WRC plus, I'd be like, all right, that's progress, because it was 76 last year, 83, something like that. So.
Yeah, getting back to average would be nice. Well, we talk about some good positive prospects and some who is getting late early. However, the fun doesn't stop when it comes to prospects, and I know you two pay attention to prospects more than a lot of people that I follow on my feed. I know, especially with the Tigers system. Before I get your predictions on 2023 of these Detroit Tigers, what are a couple of prospects that you are paying attention to in the system, either a team or a player that is going to make their major league debut, or one that's just really fun to watch? As you've mentioned, or as I've mentioned on this show, almost every episode so far in team previews, MLB TV is giving away the minor league package for free this year. So I'm highly encouraging you all to watch minor league baseball this season. So Raj, I'll start with you first. What is a prospect or two that you're really paying attention to this season?
Well, Colt Keith is number one in the Tiger Mining Report, top 25 for a reason, because he's a guy who he's already had a couple extra base hits so far in the spring. But even before his injury last year at West Michigan, he put up, for his age, an impressive season. And he was able to hit for power and average and have really good WRC plus. I think I talked about them last year, but Winfield Perez. No, actually, Winfield Perez is a guy you should pay attention to. I mean, if he's overcoming his back a little bit, he had a very good year, a breakout year. Him and Parker Meadows, who's another one who I think may have a chance to make team out of camp, if not be one of the first call ups to the Major League Club. Because Parker Meadows today, I think it was yesterday against Toronto, he ripped a double down against the lefty. Now you're thinking to yourself, well, what does that matter? He doesn't hit lefties well, and the way he was able to position himself and smack the ball is a good sign. And a guy who I've been on the bandwagon, I've been the captain of the ship for, Andre Lipsius. He's taking advantage of his limited at bats. He's a guy I think was going to make his major league debut and I think be a solid contributor, a guy off the bench. I think he can hit for average, slight little power. And defensively, he's not going to hurt you. I think he does everything just well enough. And I know sometimes people want prospects where they want this big flash, but Lipsius has been a steady contributor since he got drafted, and that's what I like about him the most. But those are the guys I would keep your eye on. And in terms of a high riser, too, outside of Wilmer Flores, another one to consider is Brandon White out of the bullpen for the Tigers, who they put on their 40-man roster. That's a guy that I think is going to be a solid contributor this year.
I love it. These are some players that I'm not paying attention to on mine, so definitely be added to my list to pay attention to. Chris, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Parker Meadows is a guy that I think we'll see on the Tigers this year. He's on the 40-man. He had a great breakout. Raj touched on it. He was a guy who always had tools. He was 6'5", super fast like a gazelle. Long strides, had raw power, good arm, good defender in center field. Just couldn't hit with any kind of impact. And then he found it last year. Hit 20 home runs, stole 17 bases, moved up to Double-A. He's been really good so far. Hit a home run in spring training. Hit that double that Raj talked about. You're looking at an everyday center fielder who could have a 2020 season in his prime, which is pretty promising for a guy that looked like a bust 2 years ago. And then Raj touched on Colt Keith. Colt Keith can just hit. He, I was listening to the Fangraphs podcast the other day about they were talking about their top 100, and they were talking about this stat they have that's in the minor leagues. It's the minor league equivalent of like barrel rate.
Okay.
And they were talking about how, in the major leagues, the average is like 15%, and Colt Keith is up above 20. He makes ideal contact a lot. He might not have a defensive position at the moment. He's trying to play third base. He got really big and strong, but he's a guy that could. He's hasn't even been to Double-A yet, but he went to the Arizona Fall League, and he would have gone to Double-A, but he got hurt. But he's a guy who could make his way to the majors by the end of the year. AJ Hinch already talked about his approach is great. We just got to work on the defense a little bit. We talked about a couple pitchers. Raj mentioned Brendan White. I mentioned Wilmer Flores earlier as the younger brother of Wilmer Flores, the infielder. He's 6'4". Fastball sits in like the low 90s. Will touch the high 90s in shorter sense. 2 good breaking balls. Working on a changeup. He came into last year as like a no doubt reliever. It seemed like, and by the end of the year, I was like, yeah, he can start. He threw a ton of strikes, and has good command. So he's a guy he'll probably start in Triple-A, but I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him in the majors at the toward the end of the season, depending on innings. Yeah, I mean, when we look back at last year, everything went wrong, but there was so much positive development in the minor league system, more than we'd ever seen before, and because they hired a new dev staff 2 years ago. And last year we really saw the fruits of that. It hasn't been reflected in major league progress yet, or on team prospect rankings. Keith Law had the Tigers with the 30th ranked farm system. Baseball America had them 27th. By the way, the White Sox and the Royals were below the Tigers on that Baseball America. I'm like, man, the AL Central. Whew.
Interesting.
But yeah, so a lot of the optimism that we see is kind of hidden right now, but we think that it's going to reflect on the Tigers in the next year or two.
Yeah, definitely something that I'm going to be paying attention to a lot is minor leagues, and you just got me really excited to pay attention to the Tigers minor league system. That's what I'm talking about. Chris, I'm going to swing it back to you real quick because Raj got to start with the fun stuff with the prospects first. So I'm going to let you start with the fun stuff with the predictions first as we close out this episode. Detroit Tigers team preview for 2023. Last season, 66 and 96 was good enough for fourth place by a game over the Royals in the AL Central. They were 26 games behind the Guardians. It was just a weird division last year, let's be honest. But again, we talked about the beginning of this episode. There was a lot of optimistic views before the season started. A lot of things went wrong. Where do you see them in the AL Central this year? Do you see them still sitting in fourth, or do they get better? Do they fall out? And then 66.5 wins, over or under for 2023?
I've got the over on the wins. I think they'll win about 70 games this year. It's part of it is, as we talked about, everything went wrong last year, and they still won 66 games, and they've improved in a number of spots, not dramatically, but I think enough. And just if you get average luck, you're going to win a few more games. So I've got them about 70 wins. I think fourth is probably correct in the AL Central, but it wouldn't shock me if they finish third, because as I talked to, the Royals are pretty bad, and the White Sox did not do a whole lot to get better. They, they've got, I think, more talent than the Tigers, but they've also lost a lot of talent, and they seem to be trending in the wrong direction right now. The Twins, I think, are pretty solid, and the Guardians didn't make a ton of additions, but they did. Josh Bell is a huge addition, like the perfect addition for them. So I think they're going to win again, and I think the Twins will probably come in second. And then the Tigers, the White Sox, I think will be battling out for third.
Awesome. All right, Raj, what do you think?
I'm gonna go with 72 and 90. I think that's gonna be my prediction. I think that the Tigers are going to improve in the sense that there's going to be more power than last year because it was historically low. It's the fourth worst offense in team history. We're talking over 125 years of baseball. In the modern times, 3.6 runs per game is tied with the 1906 Tigers. I mean, think about that for a moment. That's horrific. Totally and utterly just unacceptable. So just have to look up from here. I personally don't think the Royals are that good. I think the Royals, they do have Bollywood Jr. They have some hitters that are performing at their draft expectancy, which we don't see here yet so far. But the White Sox are a mess. I mean, you signed Andrew Benintendi to your longest contract ever by a free agent, which is disturbing on so many levels because the White Sox have this great fan base and they get Jerry Reinsdorf's just like, nah, I'm going to give you guys a middle finger. I'm not going to spend. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do these things. And their farm system is whack. And the Royals, same thing. Royals, pitcher wise, outside of Brady Singer, I think just don't have enough horses to get there. And Fangraphs having the Tigers, or the Athletic having Tigers 30th, take away my Tigers bias for a moment. That's still ridiculous. Keith Law Keith Law has every right. The Tigers haven't developed anybody in 25, 30 years. I get it. That's fine because that's true. The Tigers, last year was the first time in a long time I went, wow, there's some actual player development. And if you would have paid attention, which he doesn't, then you would see that. But he's got 3 other teams. So, tomato, we agree to disagree. But I think the Tigers have 72 wins in them. I think they're not going to surprise anybody. I know that, but I think they're going to be better than the White Sox and the Royals. I just, the Twins and Indians are going to be a fascinating battle, but I think the Guardians are going to repeat in the AL Central.
I'm really excited to see where at the end of the season or and the first half new farm rankings come out. When they finally decide, okay, maybe the Tigers are for real, like you guys think, if they get out of the basement. I'm excited to see that. I think more than the AL Central race now.
One thing I do want to give people a heads up to is the Tigers. Do not be surprised if they have another brutal start to the year. They have a really tough April schedule. I can run it through for you. They've got at the Rays, at the Astros, home to the Red Sox, at the Blue Jays, home for the Giants and Guardians, at the Orioles, at the Brewers, home for the Orioles, and that's all of April. It's a lot of teams that won a lot of games last year.
As long as you're better than the 2022 Reds, I think you'll be okay. Just don't get that bad. I think you'd be all right. And if you do get that bad, well, then the next season, Miguel Cabrera will have to go on Facebook and talk about aliens abducting, because that would be the only equivalent of Joey Votto doing the same thing on his. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this episode for the Detroit Tigers 2023 preview. It was a blast. We can't wait till next year to do year 4. We got to meet up again, get a pulse check on these Tigers and that farm club as we watch them get out of the basement. Keith Law. So let's definitely meet up again soon, maybe April or May, to do a pulse check. But before I let you go, please let everyone know where they can find you, all this stuff on Woodward Tigers, what you got coming up, so we can get that all out. You got the mic. Go ahead.
So I'm coming up with roster predictions, opening day roster 1.0 projections. That's going to be coming out tomorrow over at woodwardsports.com. And then Chris and I are working on, I'm finally getting time to finish the rest of the profiles done for Tigers ML Report. So you can go to Tigers MLB or TigersMLReport.com. Check out all the great content. We have some little blurbs too about not all the prospects, but somebody like, for example, an Adam Wolf who's in camp. So those will be coming out here in the next few days or so. And we record a live episode every Thursday night at 9 o'clock. We have one going on Sundays. Time yet to be determined, but yeah, that's what we have going on. And Christian, this has always been fun, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. Chris, anything to add before we head on out?
No, we're a team here. We've got a lot of coverage for the minors coming up soon, but Roger's going to be really digging in for the big league club too. So we're trying to come at it from all angles.
I love it. And you guys have to do the MLB draft party live like you did last year on Woodward Tigers as well. That was one of my favorite things to watch during the MLB draft. So do it again, please, for my entertainment purposes only. Okay, so just make sure you put that in the lower thirds if you have to, for Christian Rao's entertainment purposes, if you got to, if that's the case. But I'm sure you don't need any motivation, because that was fantastic. That's going to wrap it up here for this episode of the Row Report here at the OK Baseball Podcast. We'll be back here with another episode as we continue on with the 30 teams. Opening day is just around the corner. We'll be back here soon, everyone. Take care.